At dawn on the 31st of January, 1921, a keeper on Cape Hatteras saw a five-masted ship stranded far out on the shoals. Her sails were still set, as if she were trying to sail straight across the sand. For 4 days, the sea was too violent for anyone to reach her. When men finally climbed aboard, the galley was stocked, a meal was laid out, and the ship was in working order. But every lifeboat was gone, and there was not a single soul on board. This was the Carroll A. Deering. 11 men had sailed her, and every one of them had vanished. What happened to them became the largest ghost ship investigation in American history. It pulled in 5 federal departments, one of them led by a future president of the United States, and none of them could ever explain it. To understand it, you have to start with what the boarding party found in those first hours. The Deering had struck Diamond Shoals, a shifting maze of sandbars off Cape Hatteras so deadly that sailors call it the graveyard of the Atlantic. Hundreds of ships have died there. But this one had died in a way no one could explain. For days the storm kept the Coast Guard cutters away, and the great ship just sat there, lights dark, sails flapping, no one answering. When a wrecking crew finally got aboard, they found the captain's cabin turned over and every one of the crew's personal belongings gone. Spare rope and tackle had been laid out along the deck, as if the crew had been preparing to be rescued or preparing to abandon ship. The steering had been deliberately destroyed. Someone had wrecked the wheel and the gear on purpose, so the Deering could no longer be steered. The galley told the strangest story of all. Food had been prepared for the next day and then simply left to spoil. Whatever emptied that ship, the crew had time to cook, but no time or no chance to eat. And so were both lifeboats. Wherever the men went, they went over the side into the deadliest water on the American coast. So who were they, and how had it come to this? The Deering had left Norfolk, Virginia, months earlier, bound for Rio de Janeiro with a hold full of coal. But the voyage was troubled almost from the start. The man first hired to command her fell seriously ill and had to be put ashore before she had even cleared American waters. In his place, the owners called an old man out of retirement. His name was Willis Wormel, a highly experienced captain in his 60s. Wormel was respected, cautious, and skilled, but the crew he inherited was another matter entirely. They were a hard, sullen group of men. From the beginning, Wormel did not trust them. The only man aboard he felt he could rely on was the ship's engineer, and the one man he should have feared, he did not. The Deering delivered her coal to Brazil, then turned north for home, stopping to take on supplies at the island of Barbados, and it was in a bar in Barbados that the trouble finally boiled over into the open. Wormel confided to another captain there that he had lost control of his crew, and that he was afraid, above all, of his own first mate. The first mate's name was Charles McClellan. McClellan resented the old captain, who had reprimanded him again and again for drinking and for neglecting his duties. One night in a Barbados tavern, drunk and furious, McClellan was overheard making a threat about Wormel. He said, "I will get him before we get to Norfolk." He was actually arrested and jailed for the outburst. And then, incredibly, Captain Wormel paid to have his own mutinous first mate released. Days later, the Deering sailed from Barbados on the last leg home with a captain who feared for his life and a first mate who had sworn to take it. She was seen just once more. On the 28th of January, she passed a lightship anchored off the North Carolina coast. The keeper aboard her noticed something deeply wrong. The Deering's crew were crowded on the quarterdeck, an area reserved only for officers. A thin man with reddish hair, who was plainly not an officer, called across the water that the ship had lost her anchors. The lightship keeper tried to report it, but his radio was broken, and he could tell no one. It was the last time anyone saw the crew of the Carroll Deering alive, and the one record that might have explained any of it, the ship's log, was never found. When the abandoned Deering was found on the shoals days later, the story exploded across America. And she had not vanished alone. In the very same weeks, in the very same waters, other ships were disappearing too. A steamer called the Hewitt sailed the same route around the same time and was never seen or heard from again. In the same stretch of weeks, several other vessels disappeared off that coast. The newspapers began to whisper a frightening word: piracy. It was 1921. Prohibition had just begun, and the sea lanes were crawling with rum runners and criminals willing to seize a ship and her cargo, and this was the height of the Red Scare. Some in the government seriously feared the ships were being taken by Soviet pirates to build a secret fleet. The pressure grew so intense that the United States launched an investigation like no ghost ship had ever received before or since. 5 separate federal departments took up the case: Commerce, the Treasury, the Navy, the State Department, and the Department of Justice. The Commerce Secretary himself, a future president named Herbert Hoover, took a personal interest in the fate of the Deering. The full weight of the American government focused on one abandoned sailing ship and her 11 missing men. And then came the break they had been waiting for. In April of 1921, a fisherman named Christopher Columbus Gray was walking the beach at Buxton, North Carolina. There, half buried in the sand, he found a bottle, and sealed inside it, a note. The message was crude and desperate and terrifying. It read, "Deering captured by oil-burning boat," something like a chaser, taking off everything, handcuffing the crew hiding all over ship with no chance to make escape. Here at last was proof. The Deering had been taken by pirates, exactly as everyone feared, and the whole nation believed it. The handwriting was compared against samples from the ship, and at first, an expert declared it a genuine match. For months, that bottle drove the entire hunt, a search for a pirate ship that had swallowed a crew whole. And then, in the autumn of 1921, the whole thing came crashing down. Then, the handwriting was examined again, and this time, the experts called it a forgery. Gray admitted he had written the note himself. There were no pirates. There was no capture. Gray had forged the whole message, hoping the attention would help him steal a job at the local lighthouse. The single biggest clue in the largest ghost ship investigation in American history was a lie, invented by a man who simply wanted a better job. And with the hoax exposed, the whole effort quietly fell apart. So, stripped of the forged message, what really happened to the crew of the Carroll Deering? 3 real possibilities remain. The first is piracy, for real. Rum runners did seize vessels in those waters, and a ship like the Deering would have made a valuable prize. The second is mutiny. A captain who feared his crew, and a first mate who swore, out loud and in front of witnesses, to get him before Norfolk. But the third and simplest may be closest to the truth. The Deering struck the deadliest shoals on the coast, at night, in filthy weather. Believing the ship was lost, her crew abandoned her into 2 small lifeboats and rowed straight into the graveyard of the Atlantic. The ship, empty and her steering wrecked, drifted on alone and grounded herself on the sand. The men in the boats were simply never seen again. The wreck was judged a hazard to navigation, and on the 4th of March the Coast Guard blew her apart with dynamite. 5 government departments closed their files without a single answer. No bodies, no boats, no survivors, and no explanation. To this day, no one knows what became of the men who sailed her. The sea gave back the ship and kept the crew. And if all of this feels strangely familiar, it should, because half a century earlier, it had already happened once before. Another ship found sailing herself across the Atlantic in perfect order, her crew gone without a trace. 50 years apart, 2 ships came home without the people who sailed them, and neither time did the sea ever give up an answer.